Capable came about led by our patient and public involvement sessions, and it was around trying to understand the discrepancy between standard measures for assessing quality of life for patients and caregivers and those individuals' own priorities. So whereas a standard measure will typically list 50 or so perhaps questions which are set out by the authors, and the individual responding will need to assess their experience compared to those predefined areas of interest. We were testing the patient-generated index model for quality of life assessment, and this is led entirely by the individual's own assessment of what is important to them, how that's been affected by their ongoing disease and treatment, and the priority with which they assess those areas of life. So this methodology has been used in other cancers, and for us, perhaps most relevantly in traumatic brain injury, but not specifically with brain tumor, high-grade brain tumor disease. And so we were interested in seeing as a feasibility study whether it was appropriate, possible to use it in this patient group, but equally whether it's suitable to be used in a caregiving cohort as well. And so that's why we've included both patients and their caregivers in this. So Capable is designed as an observational longitudinal study. We recruited patients and their caregivers from our routine neuro-oncology clinic with the intention of following them up for the next 6 months. On the patient side, these were all known high-grade glioma patients, either at first diagnosis or at recurrence, and they were all needing to be undertaking active oncological treatment. Their caregivers were essentially anyone that the patient described as being their carer. It's not a very well described term, so anyone who is going to be accompanying them to the majority of their upcoming visits and having regular contact with them at home, and that the patient describes as fitting that criteria, we accepted to be their caregiver. For comparison, we used the EORTC and BN20 modules for patients, and for caregivers, the standard measure is the QoL questionnaire. Again, QoL is a validated standard measure for cancer caregivers, which has been used to some degree in brain tumor cohorts. So we started recruiting just before the COVID pandemic really started to bite for the first time. And so obviously that has disrupted our recruitment a lot, but we were still able to recruit 36 patients and 26 caregivers, and so with the intention of following them up for 6 months. On average, our patients were age 53, so slightly younger than the average high-grade glioma patient, and 86% of those were newly diagnosed high-grade brain tumor patients. In terms of the results that we get from using the PGI model, unlike a standard model, the PGI gives us 2 results. It gives us a numerical value for quality of life, but it also gives us the ranked lifestyle areas as listed by the participant. So there's 2 areas for comparison. On the numerical side, neither the PGI nor the standard measures picked up a statistically significant change in quality of life over the 6-month time course. They both followed that flat trend. and the PGI outcome scores were notably lower than the standard measures. And this is something that's reflected in previous work using the PGI, that the numerical score is lower than that of standard measures. Those results were reflected for both patients and caregivers, showing the same trends. And as a feasibility study, this starts to give us some information that this is a methodology that we hope will give consistent numerical outcomes as compared to standard measures. We compared those outcomes using bland outcome plots, and they generally show good alignment between the two outcome measures. When we started to look at the lifestyle topics that our participants had raised using the PGI, we were interested as to how they reflect to the domains that are raised during using the standard measures. For this, we went through the full list of all the topics that both our patients and caregivers raised, and individually assigned those to the quality of life domain most reflective, included in their respective standard measures. This is inherently a fairly iterative process, similar to a kind of thematic analysis in the way that it was conducted, and so there is some room for interpretation. We settled on assigning these topics to domains as being either a full fit, essentially meaning that the patients use the same wording in their response as is in the items for those domains in the standard measures, or a partial fit, whereby the theme of what the person was reflecting is incorporated into the wider notion of that domain. For patients, the most commonly associated domain was that of role functioning, and when you look at the questions involved with that in the EORTC questionnaire, it's around maintaining normal daily function. There was a notable number of partial fits within that domain, and typically they reflect things like driving, for example, which, though is hinted at in the domain of role functioning, is never specifically asked about. But for a large proportion of our patient cohort, them losing the ability to drive has had a notable impact on various aspects of their quality of life. Over 50% of all of the patients generated areas of life through PGI were attributed to only 3 of the domains of EORTC, which shows both the specificity, I'd say, of patient concerns, but on the flip side, it shows the very large degree to which the questions in EORTC may be relevant to clinicians, but not really to the patients themselves, and there is a discrepancy there. On the caregiver side, we did the same process, and for them, the cargo QoL domain, which had the most associated lifestyle topics, was that of psychological well-being. Quite commonly, our caregivers are talking about the anxieties associated with the diagnosis. But there was again a subtlety in their wording, where quite commonly they were talking about the anxieties they were feeling for someone else, whether that be the patient or other family members, for example. They're highlighting their role in managing the burdens and anxieties of other people around them, as well as the patient and themselves. So it's a slightly broader term than actually the questions in the QoL questionnaire reflect. So there's, again, a large degree of partial fitting to the caregiver domains. Again, over 50% of the caregiver raised items were listed in the top 3 QoL domains, which were psychological well-being, burden, and admin and finance. Again, with the admin and finance, there's no specific question listed in QoL around the caregiver's ongoing work and employment, but there was an awful lot of that raised through their topic preferences. So again, there's the discrepancy. For both patients and caregivers, there were a few items that we felt we couldn't assign to the domains that are raised through standard measures. For caregivers, one of those involves sex life, not asked about at all in the QoL questionnaire, but there was a notable number of respondents reflecting on their own intimate and personal lives, which is simply not asked about in QoL. So overall, we feel that as an initial feasibility study, Capable has shown that PGI shows the same consistency in numerical outputs as compared to the standard measures, and shows some promise in its use as a clinical research tool. But the added benefit of that is that it's equally highlighting the richer, more qualitative nature of giving a listed itemized outcome, which can be used in a clinic setting to, we hope, drive the use and referral to onward services to help manage that.